Today's lesson is based on the biblical passage of Matthew 7:7. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. In a small village, nestled beneath towering mountains, lived a man named Elias. He was known for his dedication to work, but also for an inner dissatisfaction that seemed to follow him with every step. Though he had everything any man could desire, a comfortable home, a loving family, and loyal friends, Elias felt that something was missing. He wasn't sure what it was, but he knew he wasn't complete. His eyes would often drift toward the horizon, as if searching for something beyond what his eyes could see. One day, while walking through the forest, Elias encountered an old hermit who had lived there for many years. The man was simple, with a serene expression, and seemed to live in harmony with nature. Curious, Elias approached him, and after a brief conversation asked the hermit, "How did you find such peace? I have everything I've always dreamed of, but something is still missing. Is there something more I should seek?" The hermit smiled kindly and replied, "What you seek, my friend, is closer than you think. Sometimes peace isn't found in things or possessions, but in something you must ask for, seek, and knock until you find." Elias, still confused, thanked the hermit and continued his journey. That night, the old man's words echoed in his mind. What did ask, seek, and knock mean? He didn't have an answer, but the unrest in his heart could not be ignored. Upon returning home, Elias began reflecting on his own desires. He realized that he had spent his life waiting for something to come to him, without ever making a genuine effort to understand what he was truly searching for. That night, he decided to begin a new quest, a quest that started within himself. The next morning, Elias awoke with a different feeling, as if something inside him was about to change. The hermit's words, ask, seek, and knock, reverberated in his mind as a constant reminder. He sat down at the breakfast table, but instead of eating, he lost himself in thought. What did seek mean? He had sought so many external things throughout his life: material possessions, status, recognition. But as the hermit had said, it seemed that what he truly sought was not something that could be bought or achieved through ordinary means. Elias picked up the holy book that had always been in his house, though he had never truly read it. He opened the pages with reverence and, without a clear goal, let his eyes wander over the words. It was then that his eyes fell on the passage from Matthew 7:7, the same one the hermit had mentioned, and he read it again. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. As he read this passage, Elias felt a weight in his chest. He realized that throughout his life, he had asked for the wrong things, sought in the wrong directions, and perhaps hadn't even known how to knock on the right door. He had never sought the true peace that could only be found within himself, in a deeper relationship with God and with others. That morning, in a burst of faith and determination, Elias rose, went out into the fields, and began walking toward the hill where he used to sit and meditate. The journey seemed more symbolic than physical. It was an inner quest, an attempt to understand what it truly meant to seek and knock. He wanted to understand what God was asking of him, no longer desiring material or frivolous things, but something deeper, something that could fill the emptiness he felt. The path to the hill seemed longer than usual. The sun was not yet fully above the mountains, and a soft mist covered the earth. The feeling of going in search of something important weighed on his shoulders, but there was also a sense of peace, as if he were finally taking the right direction. Upon reaching the top of the hill, Elias sat in his usual spot and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, feeling the gentle breeze on his face. Then, for the first time in a long time, he began to pray sincerely, not with repeated words, but with an open heart. He asked God to guide him, to help him understand what truly mattered, to find the purpose he had always known existed, but had never known how to reach. And it was there, in that moment of stillness and sincerity, that Elias began to realize something fundamental. The quest was not something he could do alone. It was not something he could simply find in a market or through external accomplishments. It was something that came from a sincere surrender, from a true request, and from accepting that he didn't need to fight to have all the answers. Peace did not come from accumulating wealth or satisfying desires, but from a deeper relationship with God. In that moment of prayer, Elias felt a peace he had never experienced before. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt that he had knocked on the right door, that God was listening to his quest, and perhaps was ready to guide him. He no longer needed immediate answers, because now he knew that the journey of seeking was more important than any final destination. After his silent prayer and the sense of peace that enveloped him, Elias felt something inside him was changing. It wasn't an instant miracle, nor a sudden revelation, but a subtle transformation that began to take over his being. He didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but he was determined to follow the path, with the confidence that by seeking with a sincere heart, the answer would come at the right time. In the following days, Elias devoted himself to reflecting on what he had experienced in that moment. He knew that true searching wasn't something fleeting, like the pursuit of a new material possession or status, but an ongoing journey. The teaching of ask, seek, and knock became clearer in his mind. It wasn't about making random requests or seeking external distractions, but a search for a greater, deeper purpose. Then something unexpected happened. While walking through the village, Elias was approached by an unknown man, dressed simply, but with a deep and penetrating gaze. He seemed to be someone who, in some way, possessed a silent wisdom, as though he had already walked the path of life and had something important to teach. The man approached Elias and said, "I see you're searching for something, young man. You're looking for answers that cannot be found in the world around you, aren't you?" Elias was surprised by the man's words, but decided to listen. He knew this moment had something to do with his journey. "Yes, I am searching for something deeper, something that will fill the emptiness inside me," Elias replied, his voice full of sincerity. The man looked at him with a serene smile, and then said, "The search you are undertaking is not just a journey of the body, but a journey of the soul. You won't find what you're looking for outside of yourself, but within your own heart. Only those who knock on the right door, with faith and humility, can find the answer." Elias felt that those words touched his spirit deeply. He knew, in that moment, that he was beginning to understand the true meaning of knocking on the door. It was a spiritual door, not a physical one. It was the door that would lead him to a deeper connection with the divine. The man, seeing that Elias was starting to understand, said more. "When you knock on this door, you must be ready to follow the instructions it gives you. It won't always be easy, it won't always be clear. Sometimes the door will open with challenges, with difficulties, and even with frustrations. But remember, what truly matters is what you become along the way, not what you find at the end. What you're searching for is actually something that is being formed within you with every step you take. Those words resonated in Elias like a deep echo. He felt he was starting to see things differently. His search wasn't to find something already made, something concrete, but to become something more, wiser, more patient, more humble. He would need to open his mind and heart, accepting each challenge as a lesson, each difficulty as an opportunity for growth. In the following days, Elias began to notice that the doors he was seeking were already around him, in every moment of his life. He started noticing how life moved, how situations and people seemed to align in subtle but clear ways, as if the very universe was responding to his requests and gently knocking on his door. He realized that everything had a purpose, even in the most challenging moments. Instead of seeking external changes, Elias began to focus more on changing the way he viewed situations. He became more patient with difficulties, more grateful for blessings, and sought to help others in a more selfless way. He knew that his true search wasn't just for answers, but for the transformation that would happen within him as he opened himself to life in a more full and conscious way. Over time, Elias realized that the inner search didn't have a defined end. Each moment of reflection, every challenge faced, every small change within himself were important steps toward what he was truly seeking, the peace that comes from acceptance, faith, and surrender to the divine plan. He no longer needed all the answers, nor did he need to know where the journey would lead, because he now understood that true wisdom came from trusting the walk and the process. Gradually, the village began to notice the change in Elias. He was no longer the man who felt incomplete and dissatisfied. He was now a man of peace, someone who radiated serenity and wisdom. People began seeking him for advice, knowing that he now carried something everyone longed for: a clear purpose, inner peace, and a quiet trust in God. As the months passed, Elias felt more at peace, but also more challenged. Though he had gained a deeper understanding of himself and the purpose of his life, he was not immune to the difficulties of everyday life. Problems still arose. Difficulties didn't lessen, and Elias began to realize that the true journey of seeking was even more complex than he had imagined. What he had learned so far was just the beginning of an even greater transformation. One morning, as Elias set out to carry out his daily tasks, he received news that deeply disturbed him. The village where he had been born, a simple place filled with stories, was being threatened by a powerful businessman who wanted to buy the land to build a massive commercial complex. The people were concerned about the future of the village and the impact this would have on their lives and the traditions that had been preserved for generations. Elias, who had always believed in the value of his community, could not remain silent in the face of this threat. He knew he couldn't allow the village to be destroyed by greed, but he also understood that he couldn't solve the problem alone. He became actively involved, organizing meetings and mobilizing the villagers to fight for the preservation of the land and their roots. However, as the days went by, Elias began to face resistance. Many people were fearful, thinking they couldn't stand up to the power of the businessman. Others were demotivated, feeling that it was pointless to fight against something so large. Tensions began to rise, and in a moment of frustration, Elias found himself alone on the edge of a small hill where he used to go to reflect. It was at that moment, when the struggle seemed hardest and the door appeared closed, that he felt the need to turn to God once more. Why am I going through this? Elias wondered. Why do I feel like the door is closed to me when I'm doing what I believe is right? He looked up at the sky, his eyes searching for an answer, and once again remembered the passage from Matthew 7:7. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. However, the door still seemed locked. The difficulties increased with each passing day, and Elias began to doubt. He had asked sincerely, sought with devotion, but why had he still not found the answer he was looking for? Despair began to take over his heart. It was then that he sat in the same place where he had prayed months before. He closed his eyes, and in silence, he surrendered his worries and fears to God, no longer waiting for an immediate response, but simply accepting that perhaps the door hadn't opened yet because he wasn't prepared for the answer. Sometimes, life asks us to wait, to learn to trust the process, even when everything seems out of sync with what we desire. In that moment of total surrender, a sense of clarity filled his spirit. He realized that the true answer didn't come from external actions, like fighting against the businessman or trying to solve everything alone, but from how he handled the challenges. He understood that the search wasn't just for an outcome, but for a continuous learning process. Suddenly, he remembered the words of the hermit. It won't always be easy. It won't always be clear. Sometimes, the door will open with challenges, difficulties, and even frustrations. Elias understood that, even though the door seemed closed, he had to keep knocking, but with patience and faith. It wasn't about conquering something with force, but about persevering, learning to trust the timing and divine plan. When he returned to the village, Elias began to notice the small opportunities and the people God had placed in his path. He didn't need to solve everything on his own. He found other leaders in the community willing to fight for what was right, and they began to join forces. Elias realized that, although he didn't have all the answers, God was guiding each step of the way, and the doors were opening, even though in ways he hadn't anticipated. Elias's journey became one of patience and resilience, and he began to see that the true door he needed to open was the door of his own faith, acceptance, and trust. He was no longer trying to control the future, but allowing God's peace and wisdom to guide him through each decision. Although the challenge in the village hadn't been immediately resolved, Elias knew he wasn't alone in the fight, and this renewed certainty of faith helped him move forward. As the days went by, Elias felt an even deeper inner change. Each morning, as he woke up, he no longer felt anxious or worried about the problems in the village or the difficulties that arose in his path. He began to realize that the real battle wasn't in the external world, but within himself. The transformation he had sought and often felt was so distant was occurring in a silent and constant way. The fight for the village was far from easy, but Elias no longer saw the process as a battle against external forces. He had understood that the greatest struggle was within himself, and that true victory did not depend on immediate results, but on what he became during the journey. The peace and serenity he now cultivated were no longer fragile or conditioned by external circumstances, but were deep, born of unwavering trust in God and the strength of his faith. As the days passed, the village's resistance continued to grow, but in a way that even the villagers themselves found surprising. It was no longer a resistance focused on direct confrontation, but a resistance based on unity, quiet courage, and the calm determination to preserve what was most precious to all: their roots, their traditions, and their connection to the land. Elias began to realize that many times the most significant change does not happen at the height of the battle, but in the small victories of everyday life. When the villagers began to gather more often, share experiences, and support each other more deeply, he knew something grand was underway. They were no longer just resisting the pressure from the businessman. They were creating a new reality, one where peace and love for the community were stronger than any external force. Elias, now with a serene spirit, reflected on what he had learned. True transformation begins within us. It was not just about protecting the village physically, but about ensuring that its essence and heart remained intact. He had found the true door, the one that led him inside himself, to his own heart, where God was always present, guiding him with wisdom and patience. The businessman, who initially seemed to have control of the situation, began to realize that his pressure was failing. He tried various tactics to divide the village, but the seeds of unity and faith that Elias and the other leaders had planted began to flourish. People were more willing to fight for what they believed in, but without being corrupted by anger or fear. They were fighting for the preservation of something much more valuable than a piece of land. They were fighting for their dignity, their roots, their truth. Each day, Elias felt the weight of responsibility, but also the lightness of being on the right path. He knew he could not predict the future, but he was confident that, regardless of what happened, he was being guided by something greater than himself. He had found peace, not as an end, but as a starting point for a new way forward. It was then, on a warm spring afternoon, that the businessman finally sought out Elias. He requested a meeting, and although it was a surprise, Elias felt that it was the right moment to see what God had prepared for him. When the businessman arrived, Elias welcomed him with a calm smile, without resentment, but with an open heart, ready to listen. "I came to talk, Elias," said the businessman, clearly disturbed, but also aware of the growing strength of the community. "I see that you are more united than I thought. I thought the pressure would be enough to force you to sell, but I've realized that you're not easy to bend." Elias looked at the businessman calmly, without rushing to respond. He knew his reaction would be crucial, but he also knew that he shouldn't act impulsively. Instead, he chose to respond with a deep understanding of the situation. "The village is not just a place," said Elias, looking into the man's eyes. "It is a collection of stories, memories, and feelings that have been passed down through generations. We're not just fighting for land, we're fighting for our identity, our history, our peace. It's not just about resisting your offer, it's about keeping the essence of who we are alive." The businessman looked at Elias, as if seeing something he hadn't considered before. He stepped a little closer, and for a moment seemed to reflect deeply on Elias's words. "I didn't expect to hear this," he admitted with a sigh. "I've always treated this place as just another profit opportunity, without understanding what it really means to you." Elias felt the conversation was taking a different turn, an opening he hadn't expected. He knew that the door he was seeking wasn't just in confrontation, but in the ability to open his heart and understand the other's perspective. "I'm not saying that you should give up your plans," Elias continued, "but perhaps there's a way for us to find a balance. We don't need to destroy each other. I believe that if you look at our village with different eyes, you'll see that there's something here that you can also preserve without destroying what has been built by so many hands over time." The businessman remained silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then, to Elias's surprise, he took a step back and looked at the village in the distance. "I don't know what brought me here today," he said finally, "but maybe you're right. Maybe I've been looking at this land the wrong way, without understanding the value it really has for the people." Elias smiled. He didn't know what would happen after this conversation, but he felt that something had changed, not just in the businessman, but in everyone around. The true door of transformation had opened, not in the physical world, but in the businessman's heart, who, for the first time, was beginning to see things differently. In the days that followed, the village and the businessman began negotiating, not with the intention of defeating each other, but to find a solution that would benefit everyone. Elias realized that, once again, the truth of Matthew 7:7 was manifesting. "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." The key was in the constant search for mutual understanding, in trusting the process, and in the patience to see the fruits of perseverance. In the end, the village not only succeeded in preserving its land, but also found a new ally in the businessman, who came to understand the value of preserving the legacy and history of a place, even if it meant changing his own plans. Elias, for his part, had learned that many times the true door of life is not one that we open with force or imposition, but one that opens with patience, faith, and the willingness to see beyond appearances. And so, the village flourished, not only because it had overcome an external challenge, but because the true transformation took place in the hearts of all who were willing to seek peace, understanding, and harmony. Elias knew that the door to life was always open for those who were willing to knock, ask, and seek, with faith in the right moment and the confidence that, in the end, the true answer would always come. This story invites us to reflect on the true essence of transformation and personal growth. The central lesson here is that, often, the deepest changes don't happen through big actions or external confrontations, but through an internal journey. As Elias discovered, what truly matters is not what happens around us, but how we choose to react, how we cultivate peace and patience within ourselves, and how we deal with the challenges that arise. The passage from Matthew 7:7, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you," is a powerful lesson of faith and perseverance. It teaches us that the answers we seek are not necessarily found in haste or struggle, but in the patience of waiting for the right moment, in trusting that what we need will come at the right time. The door Elias sought was not a physical door, but an internal transformation, a deeper understanding of his own journey and the role he played in the lives of those around him. The great lesson of this story is that true change begins within us. We cannot control external circumstances, but we can choose how to react to them. By focusing on what we can control our heart, our attitudes, our faith, we find the peace that guides us through difficulties. And over time, this peace not only transforms us, but can also transform those around us. Furthermore, the story also teaches us the importance of looking at others with empathy and understanding. The true door to transformation, both for Elias and for the businessman, was not in forcing a victory, but in understanding the other's point of view, seeking a solution that benefits everyone. The greatest challenge was not to defeat the other, but to be able to see the deeper needs and intentions, finding a path of harmony and mutual respect. The lesson, therefore, is, when seeking transformation, we must look within ourselves and act with faith, patience, and wisdom. We must also be able to listen, to understand, and to act with empathy. The true door to life and growth is not in fighting against what challenges us, but in finding peace and understanding in difficulties, believing that the answers come when we are ready to receive them. This challenges us to reflect on our own attitudes and how we are responding to the challenges we encounter. Are we acting with patience and faith, or are we trying to rush things and fight against the circumstances? The key to transformation and peace lies in our own willingness to seek, ask, and knock, with the certainty that, at the right time, the door will be opened. If you liked the video, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share. Let's reflect and talk to God together. See you in the next video.